Clara Olmedo, right? Clara, welcome.
Yes,
to Valdivia.
yes, we are here. Okay, we are going to share our presentation. Are you guys looking at it?
Yeah, it's okay, Clara.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. Well, my name is Clara Olmedo, and he's Iñaki Ceberio de León. We are working together in this presentation. In the first place, of course, I have to thank you, everybody, all the people that organized this wonderful opportunity and giving us this opportunity to participate in this workshop. We are going to present now a part of a theoretical discussion that we have in a research project that we are addressing the waste problem in the Chilecito town in La Rioja province, which is in the north area of Argentina. We are looking at this problem through the eyes of the theoretical proposal of Manfred and other eco-human paradigms. We are faculty members at the La Universidad Nacional de Chilecito in Argentina. Also, we are associate researchers at the Centro de Estudios Ambientales en la Universidad Austral de Chile. ¿Sí? I'm going to read this presentation and that we call Max-Neff proposal, a deep economy, and ecophilosophical perspective. In this work, we approach Max-Neff proposal from the perspective of the deep ecology by the Norwegian philosopher Arne Naess, whose thinking orbits around a biocentric worldview. From this perspective, we argue that Max-Neff offers us a deep economy that, based on biocentrism, navigates in the depths of the traditional economy to reveal the philosophical foundations that put the market, profits, and consumption as the axis of development with devastating social and ecological consequences. From our perspective, the deep economy of Max-Neff is, above all, an eco-philosophy that draws on the worldview that put life first in order to think and protect life. And it is his worldview that equates his thinking with the deep ecology and makes his proposal not only an ecological economy, but rather a deep economy. In his own and profound words, no economic interest can be under any circumstances above reverence of life. End of quotation. Why do we argue the Max-Neff proposal is an eco-philosophy? Because his reflection is based on a moral principle, the respect for life, for all forms of life. As Max-Neff said, quotation, without nature there could be no life, and without life, the entire cosmos would be meaningless. End of quotation. On the other hand, there is no way of respecting life without an organic vision of the world. In his profound vision of economy, Max-Neff draws a close connection between economy, society, and nature. The organic view of the world is characterized by a non-linear interconnections between living entities. This means that the individual and the community make themselves and require one and the other at the same time. End of quotation, Max-Neff. To understand those interconnections, Max-Neff is convinced that we need more than a scientific overview, as he said, quotation, we need a transdisciplinary organic perspective that also combines reason with intuition, matter with spirit, ethics with aesthetics, and beauty with truth. The moral principle of respect for life and the organic vision of the world contribute to develop a deep perspective on how we live and how we can build a society in harmony with nature and with ourselves. Under this framework, Max-Neff problematized the notion of human needs and the ways in which we satisfy those needs. This is expressed in his matrix of fundamental human needs, where he classifies and differentiates needs according to axiological categories and needs according to existential categories. With this matrix, Max-Neff goes deeper than Naess and addressing human needs and answering the question of what a vital need is. As Alicia Bugallo said, quotation, "The practical dilemmas of the era of ecology have raised the necessity once again of distinguishing what needs we are consuming," end of quotation. This distinction between vital and non-vital needs is not precise in the work of Naess. The term seems vague, since what may be vital in the context of one society may become trivial in another, Bugallo argues. This problem is solved in the matrix of Max-Neff, for whom the vital fundamental needs are the same in all types of society. What changes is the quantity and quality of the satisfiers and the possibility of getting the required satisfiers. A key issue if we want to move toward a sustainable society. By combining axiological and existential categories of needs, Max-Neff shows us, quotation, to what extent our perspective has been restricted almost exclusively to the sector dominated by having and doing, said Bugallo. At the same time, his matrix demystified the idea that the human needs are infinite, as classical and neoclassical economists argue. How does this ecophilosophy in Max-Neff thinking relates to deep ecology? First of all, when addressing the ecological crisis, the questions that Max-Neff raised transcend the strict field of ecology and point out to philosophical problems such as what is the place of human beings in nature, or what should be the limits of human intervention in the biosphere. Second, his attitude toward nature stemmed from a worldview that questioned the mechanistic ontology of Western thought. In this way, unlike Naess, Max-Neff asked for the profound reasons of why and how we have arrived at a critical ecological situation. This ecophilosophy is expressed along the 8 principles of the deep ecology movement platform. For instance, in the 3rd principle, it is stated that, quotation, "Humans have no right to reduce richness and diversity of life except to satisfy vital needs with responsibility," end of quotation. It implies that under any circumstances, our actions can threaten the life of future generations. Assuming that, quotation, "the term life is used here in a comprehensive and non-technical way to refer also to things biologists may classify as non-living: rivers, watersheds, landscape, cultures, ecosystems, the living earth," say Naess. All these principles and convictions are integrated in a deep criticism against the gross national product, GNP, considered by conventional economists as synonymous of development. Both for the deep economy and the deep ecology, economic development is not synonymous of human well-being, but rather the cause of the serious socio-environmental problems we suffer today. In words of Max-Neff, quotation, "Economic growth is having disastrous effects on a global scale, poisoning the biosphere, exhausting the natural resources, generating deep inequalities, and destroying the habits of many species," end of quotation. For Naess, GNP growth supports irresponsible and unsolidaric resource consumption and global pollution. In contrast, they share the idea that the economy must be at the service of the people and not the people to serve the economy, as they both used to say. To summarize the dialogue between Max-Neff and Arne Naess proposals, we emphasize on their biocentric worldview, which is based on the conviction that ecology is not limited to reflections and actions for a balanced and healthy environment to serve the well-being of humans, but rather reaches out all forms of life and ecosystems that make up nature. Both thinkers view nature from an egalitarian basis, where the flourishing of human and non-human life on Earth have intrinsic value. This is stated in the 1st principle of the Ecology movement platform. Thus, biocentrism become an ontological decentralization of the human being to place him as another part of the complex assembly of life. It turns out to be the axis of Max-Neff deep economy with profound epistemological and methodological implications. From this framework, the knowledge is no longer a tool to dominate and exploit nature, but a way to understand and live in harmony with nature. Likewise, the qualitative methodology is the path to comprehend the socio-ecological and economic problems, in contrast to the quantitative and descriptive perspective still dominating conventional theories. Finally, to better understand the thoughts of deep economy and deep ecology within a broad spectrum of the ecological movement, we present a scheme inspired in the book of Aldunate, El Factor Ecológico, 2001, elaborated around the two Cartesian axes, biocentrism versus anthropocentrism, and radicalism versus reformism, over which environmental problems and our solutions are addressed. In this scheme, both deep economy and deep ecology are in the upper left square. Their postulates focus on strong biocentrism, moving away from anthropocentrism, while proposing a radical change in the society to solve the ecological crisis. In the opposite side, the lower right square, we find one example of a neoliberal view expressed in the proposal of economic valuation of ecosystems, where the natural resources are out there to serve the well-being of humans, and the ecological damages are just quantified, without answering the questions of why and how we get there. In other words, this is a reductionist view that does not allow us to understand the roots of the ecological crisis. Let's say, in the view of Naess, the economic evaluation of ecosystem can be seen as a superficial ecology, as Naess used to say, relating it with a strong anthropocentrism. In the middle of these two antagonistic positions, we find two intermediate views. On the one hand, in the lower left square, are eco-socialism and eco-Marxism. We place these two perspectives under a weak anthropocentrism, insofar as the value of nature is rescued, but always subordinated to human beings. On the other hand, in the upper right square, we find visions characterized by a weak biocentrism. This is the case of several NGOs, proposals such as Greenpeace or WWF, whose efforts focus on particular problems, conservation of forests, species, etc., without having a holistic view of the problems they address. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, sorry. It's okay.
So we have some time for questions. People attendees can write questions on the chat, and then Martin, I think you had a question. Maybe you want to say it, or should we read it?
I can try to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I wrote a question to Clara and to a colleague in the chat. I'm working on the problem of what it means to respect life. It doesn't mean that we don't die. It doesn't mean that there's no conflict. It doesn't mean that we are not vulnerable. This is the problem I deal with in my talk, which is really a set of questions. So my question is, how does your principle of respect for life translate into accepting vulnerability and being vulnerable to death as part of being in social and ecological community? I think that's a core question that belongs to deep ecology, but I've never really heard a reply. I haven't spoken to Arne Naess for a long time, and he's no longer with us. So do you have a response on that question? Thank you.
I think, okay, Martin, thanks for your question, which is a very complex question, but it's a philosophical question, of course, that the framework of the thinking of Max-Neff give us to think about. I think that vulnerability, death, is part of the human condition, but it doesn't mean that we don't have, but if we see life, not only life in the time we live, that is, I think, the point. If we think life, the respect for life, thinking on the future generations, we can, of course, think or talk about the respect for life. That it not only implies that we have to respect our life in the time we live. I think that from the philosophical point of view, from the life that we live, we are vulnerable, and we are gonna die anytime, at any point. But it doesn't mean that the respect for life, that it challenges the idea of the moral principle of respect for life. I don't know if I'm answering your question, even though I think this is a very complicated question, a deep question. When we address this type, when we get into the philosophical reflections of Arne Naess and the Max-Neff thinking.
Thank you.
Can I also respond to that issue just with a reference? You people hearing me? I will put a link to a YouTube video of my a recent video of a conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist and a poet, who really uses poetry in a most extraordinary way to bring across that paradoxical nature of how our individual lives needing to be lived in service of a transcended life. And I think that's where Manfred talks about the need for transcendence, is somewhere within that. There is a wonderful line of inquiry to explore that, but I'll put the link up to this video and you'll get an idea. And I think he really does has helped me enormously, particularly as a social worker, where you're dealing a lot now with people who are in terminal stages, who are dying from COVID, and who are just wondering whether life is living, and who are tempted by suicide, and just help to unpack that. So I'll offer that as a further reflection.
Thank you, John. Clara, there is a question in the chat. If you could spend a few minutes there so we can try to keep up with the schedule. I can read it to everyone. It's an anonymous question. What about the people who say that we can grow because nature have the capacity to renovate their resources, and about the theory that if we have more money, we are more aware of nature? So this is I guess, the environmental Kuznets curve sort of story behind. If you could spend a few minutes there, please. You're mute. No, we cannot hear you.
I already answered the question of Martin. This is, I think, I already addressed this question, but you say that there is another question in the
yes,
chat?
About the capacity of nature to renovate itself or its resources, and about the theory that if we have more money, we are more aware of nature.
Well, this is a very difficult question because it goes into a more sociological problem. We know that both Naess and Max-Neff address the problem of inequalities. But having money, it doesn't mean that we are saved, that we are not vulnerable to the ecological crisis that we are crossing now. Let's take, for instance, the los incendios forestales. In Córdoba, we are having like this big forest fires that is in the very rich areas. It's not in the poor areas. So I think that what Manfred and Naess give us the possibility of thinking that the ecological problems are not a problem of money. At some point, we know that the people that have more money have the chance to live in better environments. As Javier Aullero, which is a sociologist, used to say, poor people don't drink the same water. Poor kids don't play in the places that rich kids play. But this is not a question. I think those proposals, Max-Neff and Arne Naess, give us the chance to think beyond the socioeconomic condition of human beings, even though they recognize that this is a crisis that makes more vulnerable poor people than rich people.
Luis?
Sí, dale.
Can I ask? Can I? Clara, it's just, I think maybe the question is about, you know, when you are really, really poor and you have to put food in your table, maybe your main concern is to bring money to the home, and everything else, it doesn't matter at that time, you know, but because that is your, and it happens in a lot of vulnerable people today in several countries, that the only concern is how to go to have food today for my family in the table. And when you don't have that constraint, maybe it is possible to think in other important thing in other way, you know, but I don't know. I just trying to put in the place of that kind of people. I don't know what you think, Clara.
Yeah, we are working like for a couple of years. We're working in a sacrifice zone in here and near to the city we live now, which is called Nonogasta, where there's a big environmental disaster in a very poor area, very, very poor. This is a leather industry that is, I mean, there could be in the first place in the crime tribunal if we have this, because this is more than 30 years, like getting away all the industrial waste, toxic waste, and the people living in the middle of this disasters. They work there. This is the best employer in terms of salary. There's the only, this is in this area, this is the only employer. The rest of the people work in the state, work in the informal sector, and they just live, survive. They survive. But now, in this pandemic, in the middle of this pandemic, where there is cancer, a lot of, like they have respiratory sickness, skin sickness, they are the most vulnerable. And now we have many people, even workers, that lose their kids. Kids that they were born with tremendous sickness. I don't know what say malformaciones. They lack some organs, so they like something very horrible. So now when they have the money and they don't have the chance to save their kids. But this is a very complicated way to go, because we as activists, we work in that community and it is really, really hard. But at some point, they get to the point that la curtiembre, as they call that industry, la curtiembre, where they are sick, they just fire them. So this is, but I'm not saying this is easy to address. Like many people didn't want to talk about this problem because they are afraid of losing the jobs, but even they are afraid that their neighbors, their kids, their family, their relatives lose the job. But now this is the most affected area because this industry is not working now because China is not buying los cueros. So I'm sorry, guys. We are not working now. So goodbye. So this is political, this is philosophical, this is sociological problem that is not easy to address. I mean, we see it from the activist point of view and also with theoretical, I mean, a scientific point of view. And this is a very hard tension all the time. But we must get into that.
Thank you, Clara.
Andres, yeah, you can come.
No, I would also perhaps also frame the question in terms of the relationship between money and the environment, in terms of economic growth and the environment, which is a very broad question and an issue, and it was also a concern of Manfred. I think that the tension is that on the one hand, you need a certain economic growth because you need to create employment, you need to create jobs and income for low-income people, for the working class, for the middle class, for everybody, in a way. But you don't want to spoil the environment at the same time. You want to make economic growth today not incompatible with economic growth tomorrow that may be harmed because of the fact that you are run out of natural resources, you have deforestation, or you have a climate crisis. I think these are very important questions. I think you can develop technologies on all this movement, which I think has limitations, the green economy, etc. But still, how you substitute for fuels, for clean energy, that's a step that can help reconcile economic growth with the environment. On the other hand, you have problems with certain governments. Here, for example, the US with Trump, but definitely don't believe in those in the environmental consequences of growth, and they give a free hand to multinational corporations and drilling in Alaska, etc. But on the other hand, not everything is lost in Scandinavian countries. They have a very civilized way to make compatible economic growth with the environment. So I think we need to do more research. We need to study better the international evidence to see how we can make both dimensions compatible. I equate economic growth with money, but strictly speaking, it's not the same thing. But with the creation of material wealth on one hand, on the need to preserve ecological boundaries and the environment on the other. It's a very important question with no easy answers. Thank you, Luis.